Ari joins us on most every Tuesday, and he joins us today. And my goodness, was there ever a more emphatic statement than Tech gave everybody on Saturday? They have work to do, but that was impressive all the way around throughout the week, too.
Yeah, I mean, look, Smokey, you and I have seen this conference have some dominant teams, and, we talked a ton about the opportunity for the Big 12 to, still maintain some of those teams, because at this, up until this point, we didn't really know that there was, a true measuring stick for the rest of the conference like this conference is used to having. And so, yeah, I mean, Tech is that. They are very much in line talent-wise up front with some of the big, SEC Big Ten teams. So I guess that's what we were looking for. And yeah, I mean, they're just absolutely dominating. I will say, though, there's a flaw within them. I think, defensively, they're as dominant as anybody, and that will keep them in games and will have them go far potentially in a playoff situation. But they need to finish drives with touchdowns. Their offense isn't good enough. And ultimately, I think that's where they need to have the biggest step forward. But it's hard to poo-poo much with Tech right now because, yeah, I mean, they're just absolutely destroying teams. And, I mean, the two top teams in the Big 12, we'll see after tonight where the college football playoff thinks BYU and Utah are, but I'm assuming both will still be in the top 15. So to do what Texas Tech has done to both Utah and BYU this year, considering what the playoff thinks they are and what they've done to the rest of the conference, is incredible.
Ari, how nebulous is these next, or dangerous the next couple of weeks for the Big 12 in the getting two teams in the playoff? I think the ACC did them a big favor this last week by kind of clearing off some of the, well, what if this happens teams from that list. But even still, the deck is stacked against them when it comes to the public perception. And another BYU loss before the championship game, another Utah loss before the championship game probably means it's just the champion.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think nebulous is the right word, Paul. I mean, this is the time of year where you have slip-ups. This is the time of year where you look at the schedule and you see wins, and then they play these games and crazy things happen. And so, yeah, I mean, this weekend in particular is one of those. Now, granted, the two slip-up spots potentially are home games where BYU hosts TCU, but we'll see what kind of TCU team we get. And then, Texas Tech is hosting UCF. But I think when you look at sort of that second or third tier of the Big 12, Arizona visiting Cincinnati, it's another game that could help to, lift the profile of the Big 12. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. Like, this is in Utah, Baylor too. I mean, in Baylor, obviously if Baylor is able to duplicate what they did against UCF defensively, then they're going to give Utah all kinds of fits. That might be the most glaring one. But again, we've seen a much larger sample that suggests Baylor's defense is probably not very good. Although we'll see if this is a recent trend with the 3 points that held UCF to a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, I mean, look, the calendar turns to November. Crazy things happen. I think it's partly because, you're holding on for dear life. And that's the reason these things are marathons. You're trying to get as healthy as you possibly can, but nobody's healthy. Everybody's just trying to be as healthy as they possibly can to be able to play. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you still have 18, 19, 20-year-olds that, things happen over the course of the week that could dictate the outcomes of these games, which is why we have crazy upsets this time of year across the board. So I think nebulous is the perfect word, Paul.
So from a BYU perspective, I thought Kalani Sitake said all the right things in the postgame, handled the loss really well. Just go back to the drawing board, give respect to Texas Tech. And they were in a hornet's nest, to be sure, but didn't score. I mean, we're almost shut out. Didn't score until the fourth quarter. Bear Bachmeier wasn't able to break off the big plays like he had been kind of accustomed to. And then defensively, they played a much more explosive set of offensive weapons than they had played. How do you look at BYU? I mean, are they still, in your opinion, one of the best teams in the country? You mentioned with Texas Tech, you don't have full faith in that offense right now. How would you, I guess, look at BYU under the same microscope?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think, I'm projecting Tech out in terms of like the Ohio States, Indiana's,
sure,
Notre Dame's of the world, more so than this conference, which I think at this point they've proven, to be pretty dominant. Their one loss, obviously to an Arizona State team that had both Sam Levitt and Jordan Tyson healthy, which, has been like a solar eclipse this year to get both of those guys healthy at the same time. It's been, very difficult. And then, Will Hammond was at quarterback and not Baron Morton. So, yeah, look, I mean, it's so interesting because at the end of the day, BYU finally looked like they had a true freshman quarterback. It was the first time all year. And I mean, Sheil Wood and Texas Tech defensively just had the right game plan, which is choke out the run. Now, much easier said than done because most teams have known that that's what BYU wants to do and haven't been able to stop it. It's just that Texas Tech is that good up front on defense. And then they've got the linebackers and Jacob Rodriguez, to be able to clean that up. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, there's such a weird standard right now for BYU to where like we're not really allowing for a freshman quarterback to be a freshman quarterback. And that's his own doing because he's played so well. But, the expectations have gone so skewed for BYU considering, again, he is literally a true freshman quarterback, but 67 yards rushing, in the game, Cameron Dickey became the leading rusher in the Big 12, which says a lot because, both Williams and Dickey have been so effective this year. So for them to have two guys like that are, at this point, one guy is now leading the Big 12. It says a lot about how effective that running game is. But yeah, I mean, look, is there a blueprint that Texas Tech laid out to beating BYU? I'm not so sure, other than if you have the guys that can whip them up front, like Texas Tech seemed to have, and then the linebackers to clean it all up, then, it's a lot easier to play against a rush offense that is trying to rush the football. I mean, Texas Tech, I think, puts the screws to you in a way that creates nerves. I mean, we saw BYU is usually pretty good on special teams, and they were terrible. Special teams is a huge difference in this game. Obviously, BYU's defense exploded in the first series, and then they muffed the punt, which sets Texas Tech up perfectly. After that first series, they had a missed kick, a missed field goal. They had a shanked punt. They were fielding punts, that they probably shouldn't have and let go into the end zone. So I feel like some of that is just the pressure that Tech applies to you that, you have to be perfect. And because of that, their special teams is off. So, ultimately, I think what we saw were two really good defenses. Again, Tech needs to figure out a way to be better, more effective in the red zone. They're at 53% in terms of their touchdown rate in the red zone. Their scoring rate's high, but I don't look at the scoring rate because, when you're in the red zone, three should be a given, especially for where Tech is. So I look at the touchdowns, and they're 29 touchdowns and 54 red zone trips. That's not good enough, to be at the top of the sport. But yeah, for BYU, I think defensively, they're still really good. And offensively, there were some holes that were shown, but we should have known that because it's a true freshman quarterback, and then special teams did make some mistakes that were crucial, I think, in this game.
Yeah. Ari, which of these three teams, TCU, Baylor, or Kansas State, or how do you rank them in the disappointing scale? Because Baylor and TCU have this very just kind of their feeling about them at this point in the season. That they have talent, but they are deficient so badly in certain areas that it's cost them games, even though, again, they could have won a lot of these. And then Kansas State, it just feels like the wheels fell off, and they've put them back on for temporary times, but not really, tightened the lug nuts all that much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Paul. I think those are three, intriguing teams because, I mean, a lot of people thought Kansas State could win this conference. And so, I mean, a hugely disappointing season for where they are. I picked Baylor to win the Big 12. I figured, with the offense and everybody that returned in the running game, and then the fact that, Aranda would have a full offseason to fix the defense, like I was buying it. So, I'll probably put Baylor in that conversation. And yeah, I mean, TCU was very quietly, very much in the race until last week. And they were in complete control of that football game. I mean, they were up. It's surprising that Iowa State's defense was able to hold a what's been an explosive TCU offense. And I mean, to that point, it was like 17-6, and then it was 17-12. And then Iowa State gets the punt return for touchdown. And then Jeremy Payne has a 28-yard run for TCU, and then he puts the ball in the deck. I mean, it was just like crazy to watch that game unfold, honestly, the way that it was. And so I almost want to throw TCU at the top of that list, simply because, like, to get to, like, when we're looking at preseason expectations, you're probably talking about Baylor and Kansas State. But when we look at like how this season has unfolded, I mean, TCU is still very much in it with the two conference losses. They would have been 7-2. And though we might not see a 2-loss Big 12 team get to the title game it's not on the realm of possibility. If you're within 2 wins, if you've got just 2 losses, you're in the conversation as Utah is. So, I'd say for where we are in the season, like from a preseason expectation standpoint, I'd say that's got to be either Kansas State or Baylor, and probably more Kansas State because I was one of the few that picked Baylor to win the conference. But I think the way that this has unfolded, TCU is a huge disappointment because they had an opportunity to go on the road, and beat a team that a lot of people have been beating. And they Caden Salter looked great against Iowa State's defense. So it's just surprising that TCU was so ineffective, especially in their passing game against a defense that, in the last 5 weeks has looked extremely ineffective.
Ari, Arizona got bowl eligible. Good for them. Nice step forward for Brent Brennan and company. So you can comment on that if you want, but you are a KU guy. And what is going on right now? What's kind of the feel with Lance Leipold and the Jayhawks? I mean, there's definitely a level of disappointment, maybe not to the extent of the others of where you were picked to be like preseason Big 12 winner, but it doesn't feel like things are good right now. Am I just misreading the situation, or can you kind of give me the insider perspective on how Jayhawks fans feel about the current state of things?
Yeah, I think first off, congrats to Brent Brennan in year 2 for getting his team to a bowl game. And I don't think that's you're making up anything. I think that is very real. I think it's extremely conflicting because, as we know, Kansas was just an atrocious program that Lance Leipold saved, but it appears that he could only deliver them to a certain point. And, some of that goodwill is absolutely running out. And it's maddening to watch this team consistently make the same mistakes. And I mean, we can go to the final decision. They have a 4th and 2 deep in Arizona territory. You've got a kicker that hasn't missed all year, but after the game, they said that he felt like he pulled something or didn't feel right following the 50-yard make he had earlier in the game. And, Lance Leipold said after the game that he wasn't sure that Jalen Daniels could have gone out there for the 4th down play. And that's the reason that he decided to kick the field goal. You do have a underclassman quarterback that has a similar skill set to Jalen Daniels. And it's like, take the context out because I know context matters, but just big picture, it's just the same mistake over and over and over again. I mean, it's consistently playing not to lose. And we've seen that rear its head throughout games across the season. The Missouri game, I pointed that out where, they're trying to run clock before half to get into halftime. And meanwhile, Missouri's taking timeouts. They get an extra 3 points before halftime, and then they score at a half. And suddenly what was a close game is now a 10-point swing. It's insane how conservative he is and how often it's blown up in his face and his inability to see that and then adjust to it. Even earlier in this game, Kansas faced a 3rd and 5 from, I believe it was the Arizona 40, and they took a shot down the field, which I'm fine with. They got Emmanuel Henderson one-on-one coverage down the field, and they missed. And instead of going for it on 4th and 5, again, from the Arizona 40, you think you call that play because you've got 2 plays to get to 5 yards. Instead, they take a delay of game and then punt the ball. I mean, it's the same stuff over and over and over again. You've got a 6th-year quarterback. I'm not sure why you have to have kid gloves with a quarterback that's in his 6th year. So, yeah, I mean, this is me complaining because I was more frustrated after that Arizona loss than I've been as a Kansas football fan in a long time. Because we see this over and over and over and over again. When you play not to lose, you end up losing. And yet here's a guy that's been a really good coach in nearly so many different facets. Yet there's one area that is it's tough to reconcile that. And so, I don't have a great sense of how on the hot seat he is. My read on it is, he's going to get at least one more year, but I also wouldn't be totally shocked if he was out after this year. And I'll say this. They had 3 cracks to win their 6th game and get to bowl eligible. 2 more now with Iowa State this week, who obviously played a lot better, so it's not as easy of a win. And then Utah. If they end up 5-7, I'd say it's probably a 50-50 shot that Lance Leipold loses his job because
that would be back-to-back, right? Here?
Yeah, Ari, I wonder how much the facilities expenditures might be like putting it off a year because of, he doesn't have a Brian Kelly $54 million buyout, but it's still money. I mean, still a huge chunk of money that they'd have to come up with for him, that with all the things that they're doing with the football stadium might just last another year. And maybe you don't want to get involved in this chaos, but You can check off boxes of everything that Lance Leipold does well. And you can have this huge list of like, man, really not had a coach like that at Kansas in a long time. And then you get to fourth quarter and just kind of defensive philosophy overall. And it's just big question marks on how they've gotten here. It's the same every single time.
Yeah. And, again, go back to the 4th and 2, like worst case scenario happened. You miss the kick, you don't get any points, but even if you do, they still can go down the field and score and go ahead. And I know your defense has played well all game, but your defense has let you down in that spot multiple times this season. So, counting on your defense in that spot was not the right choice. Lance Leipold has lost 7 of his last 9 games decided by 7 points or less. He's 8-14 as the head coach of Kansas in games decided by 7 points or less. That's not a coincidence, guys. These are decisions that are going into it each and every week that are dictating the outcomes of games, and they're the wrong decisions, and he's not learning from them. He continues to make the same mistakes. Paul, you're right. There are a lot of boxes he checks off. Kansas has had the fewest amount of players leave for the transfer portal since Lance Leipold has been there. That's huge. What he's done and to create credibility amongst his program, create accountability, to lift them up from they were an FCS program playing in the Big 12 for a decade. That is not hyperbole. That is what they were. So to get them to being credible to now being upset when they lose is a huge stepping stone. But you're also at a really important time in your program because you're starting to get some buy-in from fans that's going to translate, to attendance, which they sorely need. I almost argue the opposite, Paul, not that it's cost prohibitive, to get rid of them because you're spending this money on the stadium, but more so that like you can't afford another lame duck 6-6 year with Lance Leipold with the negative momentum you have with the program right now in terms of fan, a fan engagement. I mean, Lance got them to a point of fan interest that, was incredible considering the fan apathy that we'd seen for a long time, but now it's at a point of diminishing returns. So, and last year, you could chalk last year up to a bunch of different things and excuses. And look, you needed to win out at the end of the year in order to get to bowl eligible. But this year, to be where they were and to completely fumble down the stretch of the season and to now be on the precipice of going 5-7 yet again, that's inexcusable, especially with the roster that you have.
Last thing, and you're right. If I can hear the frustration in you, you sound like me for the last 15 years with Nebraska football. Real quickly, who Cincinnati or Houston? If it's not Tech against either BYU or Utah, which of those two? And Cincinnati was spanked by Utah, but Utah's got to have a lot of things happen to get to the championship game. Which of those two, if one of them was to play Tech, who would it be?
I would say Cincinnati if you're making me pick. I was surprised by what happened against Utah simply because I thought going into the game that like Cincinnati had some dudes up front on both offense and defense, and Utah proved that they didn't. So I'm not sure they would give Texas Tech much of a game again, considering, Utah just whipped them up front on offense. And like just look at the box score of any Utah game. If they're able to run the ball like they were, that means they're absolutely knocking you off the ball and destroying you. And that's what they did to Cincinnati. Houston's a great story. Look, 8 wins is incredible. They probably should not have won the game they won on Saturday, considering they were -2 in the turnover differential and Wigman had 4 picks. But I mean, give credit to Willie Fritz for having an 8-win season in year 2, considering where the talent and where this program is. I mean, that defense is salty. So, I'd say Cincinnati at this point in time. But I mean, really what I want to see is a rematch between Texas Tech and Utah. They feel like the 2 best teams in the conference. And it seems where Devin Dampier is right now, that they're in better position to at least make a game of it much different than what we saw from the Utah-Texas Tech game the first time around.
Thank you, buddy. You look good. Have a great day. Ari, we'll see you soon.